In life, I think we've all got our strengths, and one of mine's been at an early age is that people have always felt comfortable telling me their secrets, if you like, or what's really important to them. And I've always taken that as a real honour and a privilege that people are prepared to share things with me, and I can have a complete stranger walk into my office and 10 minutes later they're sharing things with me that I can tell is an uncomfortable conversation, but once those floodgates open, they really want to share everything with me because they sense there's a trust there and an understanding more than anything that I get what's fundamentally most important to them. And by understanding that, I can then establish where they're at and essentially what's missing, so any gaps, and help, I guess, prepare a plan to fill those gaps, which is the art of estate planning. So for mine, I just feel comfortable in this space. It's a very emotional area, and I think I connect well with people. I like to think I do. And what really drives me is fundamentally helping people, but it's hard to help someone unless you really understand what's most important to them.
Yeah, and so why do you do this though? I mean, helping people's one thing, but you know, you could be a doctor or help them get into a new home or something. Why do you do this?
Well, it's a good question. I guess I'm a qualified financial planner, so I could be talking to clients about their investments and all sorts of things. I just find this area really interesting and stimulating, and I think this is where my strengths lie. So I've gravitated towards it, and I believe it's a very emotive area, and a reason why a lot of other advisors like myself steer clear of it. I think you're either wired for this type of area or you're not, and I've definitely gravitated into this, and I just feel like it's my niche. I'm comfortable, it's my home, and when we help people with really difficult but important conversations and we get great outcomes for them, and to see the relief at the end of it, the peace of mind, the satisfaction that they've actually been able to resolve something that's been an innermost anxiety point in their life for sometimes many years, that gives me a great sense of personal satisfaction.
But it's not really that important, is it?
What?
Getting your estate plan done.
Well, you know, it's when you stop and think about it, what's most important in people's lives is generally their family, their loved ones, and the thought of something happening to one of your loved ones, let alone a child or so forth, is quite devastating. But what's even worse, if there's no plan in place to look after those people who are most precious in your world, then what are you leaving? You're actually creating disaster. You're creating conflict. So I think when people really stop and think about this, and this is what I find by taking people through a process, is that once they stop and think about it, they really start to acknowledge that this is something they want to do, and not just do, but do properly. So they need someone to walk them through that, and that's where I come in. Okay.
So what's so important for estate planning with, say, a business owner? Because I'm guessing that the work that you do there might be a little bit different to, say, someone that works in a job.
Yep, sure. Well, there's a couple of aspects there. There's the business itself, but typically the business owner has a family. So does that business provide for the family? And invariably that question is yes. So what happens if something happens to that business owner? Will the business survive? Will there be continuation of that? Is there a plan in place? How will the family cope if all of a sudden that business is no longer there? So we need to gently balance the business needs and the family needs, but I take a simple approach, family first, followed by business. Both important, but we need to always get to the point of what's most important to you. And if it's your family, that's where we need to do our planning first.
Now, it occurs to me that people generally know that they need a will, they generally know that they might need an estate plan. Most people will go to a lawyer to do that though. Are you a lawyer?
That's a good question. No, I'm not a lawyer. I prefer to be called a succession planner because I'm dealing with people's personal succession and business succession. If I had $1 for every time someone walks into my office and when I ask how can I help you, I'm just after a simple or cheap will. I never prejudge that. I say, that's great, do you mind if I capture your world up on the whiteboard? And I start taking them through a process. And invariably, at the end of that hour meeting, the common feedback I get is there's far more than meets the eye. And one of the tendencies with estate planning that I see lawyers quite often do is jump into solution mode or legality. But it's very difficult to jump into that unless you understand the bigger picture, the whole estate, because the estate can include things that don't revolve around a will. It can include things such as children with vulnerabilities, drug dependency or a disability, blended families. There's so many facets of estate planning that we need to fundamentally understand before we go into solution mode. So I guess my role in this process is to collaboratively work with other professionals such as the solicitor, such as the accountant, such as the financial planner, to facilitate this process by having them all involved so we get the right outcome for the client. So the lawyer is absolutely crucial here, and the lawyer is the one that will prepare all the legal advice and the documentation. But I'll facilitate that process. I'll advise the client, but more importantly, I'll extract out of them what's really driving them before we start to provide instructions to the lawyer. And I think that's a fundamental difference. The reason I got into this space is because for years I'd ask questions to clients, do you have a will? And invariably the answer would be no. Would you like a will? Yes. I'll facilitate a meeting with a lawyer. Then 12 months later at our annual catch-up, I say, by the way, I never received a copy of the will. Would you mind sending that through? Well, we never got there. And I got a little bit sick of that approach and quite concerned that, here I am as an advisor asking these questions and ticking a box. And in a way, from a compliance point of view, I've done my bit. But from a father, from a business person, that client is exposed unless they have an actual will in place. So that's where I decided, well, hey, I want to start taking control of this process. I want to start advising clients, facilitating this process and working with the solicitor to make it happen.
Great. So, yeah, you had a story, something happened?
Yeah, about 10 years ago, farming clients of ours who were dealing with their personal insurance needs, putting life insurance and so forth in place, and had put all of that in place. I had discussed with them for about 3 years the importance of having a will, and they agreed it was. I referred it on, but for a variety of reasons it was never done. They went to the extent of going to Australia Post and getting a will kit, and I see this quite often, that again had probably completed 80% of it, but got stuck on things such as guardianship and so forth. Too hard basket, they put it aside. Got the tragic call that just before Christmas he was driving back to the farm and was killed in a road crash. And what he left behind was a wife with 3 kids under 5 years of age. And it's absolutely devastating. So it really rocked my world that, there's no will here. And the aftermath of that, and particularly with farming estates, there's so much complexity. We had a situation where the daughter-in-law lived on the son's parents' farm. It became an estranged relationship and quite bitter. Legal fighting and wrangling and so forth. The only positive that came out of this, fortunately, is we had life insurance.
Yeah, so what was the outcome of it? There were lots of legal wrangling and fighting.
Yeah, well, the outcome is quite simple, that the farm asset that they relied on, the farming business, ultimately they fought for a few years in the courts. and split a family. We had a scenario where the grandparents weren't able to see their grandchildren. The mother became very bitter about being left in this situation, that there was no succession, no compensation, and this all ties back to having a properly constructed will, and in this case a farming succession arrangement as well. So those sorts of things, they galvanise you in certain directions, and I actually decided that you need to take control. It's no good just having this conversation, highlighting the importance, getting a client to say yes, referring it on, and then forgetting about it. So hence why I decided I now need to take charge of this and create a model where I can walk people through a process, and importantly when they engage me, that I commit to get it done. Sure, we work to time frames, and we generally aim for 3 months. Sometimes it takes us 6 months, but ultimately the commitment is there to make sure it happens.
What if you've got a family that's got an awful lot of debt, and maybe they can't afford for someone to die? Or...
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and invariably that's families do. They have more debt than they realise, because there can be hidden debts there through taxes and so forth as well. So look, for mine, once you understand what assets somebody has and the distribution of those assets, fundamentally what we need to make sure is that the right assets end up in the right hands at the right time. Now, if we have an asset, let's call it the family home, how important is it for the family home to be maintained intact for the family to live? And if that's really important, then we need to make sure that that asset is unencumbered. And quite often the mistake a lot of people make is they may see a debt attached to their home, but may not realise there's also directors and personal guarantees back to their businesses or other debts. And part of my discovery process is to really identify those assets and to understand what needs to happen to those assets, because ultimately we want them to end up in the right hands, which is invariably family. So if we've got the family home, for example, which is paramount, must go to the family, well, we need to make sure it's unencumbered. So we talk about estate planning strategies or estate funding strategies, and typically we use insurance solutions for that, which is generally the most effective way to address it. And again, just to highlight the point that if we just simply focus on the home debt, we might be missing the fact that the business has personal guarantees back to the home. So we need to take a bit of time, and this is where I need to work collaboratively with their accountant or financial planner to really understand these things. And then we can come back and we can put a range of estate funding solutions to the client and help them make an informed choice of what's right for them. But invariably, most people want to make sure that the family home will flow through to the family unencumbered.
So, oh God, I tried to get insurance once and it was just a nightmare.
Yeah, look, it's not easy, and I guess again to have someone or a group to walk you through that process is really important. Having given advice in this area for over 20 years, the approach I take is to understand everything up front. And what I always say to every client is, let me seek 3 opinions before we even take you down that process, because if it's an unfavourable outcome, it's better to know up front than at the end. And generally 50% of terms that come through are modified in some way. So again, if we can give clients a little bit of certainty around what it'll look like up front, by spending a bit of time talking to insurers on their behalf, taking a completely independent approach, so understanding the need and then sourcing the best available terms and covers up front, for mine is very valuable. And the other thing I would say is that what you ultimately want is, once those terms are offered, they need to be guaranteed, they need to be non-cancelable. And what concerns me is I see a lot of insurance offers out there, which is very easy tick-a-box approach to receive cover, but what a lot of people are unaware of is that there's exclusions. They can be cancelable contracts. So at the time of claim, you can all of a sudden be assessed, and if there's not a required level of disclosure, that policy may not be paid. For mine, that's not what we're about. We're about creating certainty for people's futures, particularly when it comes to their family.
Discount?
So one of the benefits of being around for over 20 years, we've established very good relationships with the leading insurers, and we've been able to negotiate on behalf of our clients some very favourable discounts, which again, I guess is another benefit of why you would choose Succession Matters.